In the harshest reaches of winter, when shadows stretch long across mountain snow and wolves no longer howl for those forgotten, a woman's true wealth can be measured in what she's willing to share. Leora Vane knew this truth in her bones as she huddled beside her dying fire, one piece of bread between her and starvation. Once the respected daughter of a healer, now a solitary figure surviving at the edge of existence, she had been stripped of everything but her stubborn dignity. The villagers who once sought her mother's remedies now crossed to the opposite side of the path when they saw her coming, whispering cursed bloodline in her wake. 5 small flames remained in her hearth, 5 small chances to survive the night. When the knock came at her door, Leora hesitated. Who would venture to her isolated cottage during the season's worst storm? The wind's howl seemed to carry warning, yet something deeper than reason drew her forward. Perhaps the same instinct that had kept her alive these 3 years since her mother's passing. Tonight might be the one that takes me, she whispered to the empty room, a ritual that made the silence less oppressive. She couldn't have known that opening her door to a frost-covered stranger would tear her from obscurity and thrust her into the heart of a kingdom's ancient conflict. Nor could she have foreseen that sharing her last bread with a beggar would reveal not just an alpha king in disguise, but a connection that would challenge everything she believed about power, mercy, and her own worth. For in a world that values only alpha strength, an Omega's compassion might prove to be the most revolutionary force of all. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The howling wind clawed at the timber walls of Leora Vane's cottage like a desperate animal. Winter had come early to the mountain village of Thornridge, but Leora had long ago stopped expecting mercy from the seasons, or from anyone else for that matter. She huddled closer to her dying fire, hands trembling as she counted the embers as if they were gold coins. 5 small flames remained, 5 small chances to survive the night. Outside, darkness had already swallowed the forest, and with it, any hope that the storm would pass before dawn. Tonight might be the one that takes me, she whispered to herself, a ritual she'd developed in the 3 years since her mother's passing. Speaking to the empty room made the silence less oppressive. The cottage had once been filled with the scents of healing herbs and the soft murmurs of villagers seeking remedies. Her mother, despite being an Omega in a world that valued only alpha strength, had been respected for her knowledge of plants and poultices, until the fever came, until the alpha's son died under her care, until the whispers of cursed bloodline replaced requests for medicine. Leora wrapped her threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders. At 22, she'd already lost too much. Her mother, her apprenticeship, her place in the village. All that remained was this small cottage at the edge of the forest, and the knowledge of herbs that no one would accept from her hands, and a single piece of bread. She glanced at it, sitting on her worn wooden table, the last of her food, saved for tomorrow. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she refused to give in. One more night. She could endure one more night. The wind howled again, this time bringing with it a sound that made Leora freeze. Between the gusts, she heard it, a faint knocking at her door. No one had knocked on her door in months. The villagers avoided her cottage as if disease still clung to the walls. Even the pack wolves, wild but respectful of territory, no longer ventured near her home. The knocking came again, weaker this time. Leora grabbed the fire poker, the closest thing to a weapon she possessed, and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sounding strange to her own ears after so many days of speaking only to herself. No answer came, only the sound of something, or someone, sliding down the outer wall of her cottage. Cursing her own foolishness, Leora unbarred the door and pulled it open. The wind immediately punished her, slapping her face with icy fingers and threatening to extinguish what remained of her precious fire. But it wasn't the cold that made her gasp. A man lay crumpled on her threshold, his face obscured by a frost-covered hood. His clothes were simple, worn, a traveler caught in the storm, or perhaps a beggar from one of the neighboring villages. His body trembled violently. "Goddess help me," Leora muttered, setting aside her poker. Whatever danger this stranger might pose couldn't be worse than the certain death he faced if left outside. With strength born of necessity, she dragged him inside and managed to close the door against the raging storm. The man was heavy, but she succeeded in propping him against the wall beside her fire. "Sir? Can you hear me?" She pushed back his hood, revealing a face that startled her. Even through the pallor of cold and the shadow of a beard, she could see he was young, perhaps a few years older than herself, and possessed of striking features: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a noble brow that seemed at odds with his ragged clothing. His eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow. Leora worked quickly, removing his frozen outer garments and wrapping him in her only blanket. She added the last of her kindling to the fire, silently saying goodbye to heat for the coming days. The stranger's life mattered more than her comfort. As warmth slowly returned to the cottage, the man's shivering subsided. Leora checked his extremities for frostbite, grateful to find none. Her mother had taught her well: how to assess, how to heal, skills now used only on herself, and apparently on mysterious strangers who appeared during storms. When his eyelids finally fluttered open, Leora found herself staring into eyes of such unusual amber that they appeared almost golden in the firelight. For a moment, neither spoke, and Leora felt a strange sensation settle in her chest, as if something ancient had awakened from a long slumber. "Where?" His voice cracked, rough from cold and disuse. "You're safe," Leora said, reaching for her water skin. "You're in my cottage at the edge of Thornridge. The storm caught you, it seems." He drank greedily when she offered the water, his eyes never leaving her face. There was an intensity to his gaze that made Leora uncomfortable, not with fear, but with an awareness she couldn't explain. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice stronger. "I didn't expect to find shelter in these mountains." "Nor kindness, I imagine," Leora said with a hint of bitterness. "Not many travelers come this way, especially in winter. I'm not a traveler by choice." He straightened, wincing slightly. "My name is Ronan. Just Ronan. No family name, no pack affiliation." Leora didn't press. The mountain territories held many secrets, and those who wandered them often had reasons to keep their identities hidden. "Leora Vane," she offered in return. "Former healer's apprentice, current hermit." A faint smile touched his lips. "A healer? Then my luck is better than I thought." "Former," Leora emphasized. "The villagers no longer trust my family's remedies." Something flashed in Ronan's eyes. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. People fear what they don't understand, and they rarely understand true power. The statement hung between them, loaded with meaning Leora couldn't decipher. Before she could respond, her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. She flushed with embarrassment, aware that her guest would now know the extent of her poverty. Ronan's gaze drifted to the lone piece of bread on the table. "Is that all you have?" Leora lifted her chin. "It's enough. Not for two. You need it more than I do." She stood and retrieved the bread, breaking it in half. "No," breaking off the larger portion and offering it to him. "Eat. Regain your strength." Ronan stared at the bread, then at her, his expression unreadable. "You would share your last meal with a stranger?" Leora placed the bread in his hand. "My mother taught me that kindness isn't measured by what you can afford to give, but by what you cannot afford to withhold." Something shifted in Ronan's face, a softening around the eyes, a tension in the jaw. He took the bread with a reverence that seemed excessive for such a humble offering. "Why live here alone?" he asked after he'd eaten. "Why not seek better fortune in the valley towns?" Leora settled back by the fire, chewing her own small portion slowly to make it last. "This cottage is all I have left of my mother, and despite everything, these mountains are home." She hesitated before adding, "Besides, Omegas aren't welcome everywhere, especially not ones with my family's reputation." At the word Omega, Ronan's posture changed subtly. His back straightened, his shoulders squared, and for a brief moment, Leora could have sworn she caught a scent. Powerful, dominant, undeniably alpha, before it vanished again. "What happened to your mother?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Leora rarely spoke of her past, but something about the stranger's quiet attention made the words flow. She told him about her mother, a gifted Omega healer who had carved out respect in a village dominated by traditional pack hierarchy. How they'd lived peacefully until the Alpha's son fell ill with the mountain fever. How her mother had tried everything to save him, working for 3 days without sleep. How the boy had died anyway, and grief had transformed into blame. "They said she poisoned him," Leora said, staring into the flames. "That Omegas shouldn't play at medicine. The Alpha banished her from the village center, but allowed her to remain here at the edge of his territory, out of what he called mercy." Her voice hardened. 2 months later, she died of the same fever. No one came to help us. And you've lived here alone since then? Ronan's voice had dropped to a dangerous register, though his anger didn't seem directed at her. Leora nodded. I gather herbs, make simple remedies for myself. Sometimes I trade with passing merchants for necessities. She gestured around the sparse cottage. It's not much, but it's mine. You've survived where many would have surrendered, Ronan observed. That takes strength that has nothing to do with being alpha or omega. The compliment warmed her more than the fire. For years, she'd heard only criticism or silence. To be seen, truly seen by this stranger felt like water to parched earth. They talked as the night deepened, the storm outside fading to occasional gusts. Ronan spoke little of himself, only that he came from the Eastern Territories and had business in these mountains. He asked many questions about the village, the Alpha's rule, the surrounding lands. Leora answered honestly, finding unexpected relief in conversation after so much solitude. As exhaustion finally claimed them both, Leora insisted Ronan take her small bed while she settled before the dying fire. Despite his protests, she would not be swayed. You're still recovering, she said firmly, and I've slept by this fire more nights than I can count. Ronan finally acquiesced, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't accustomed to being refused. Leora wondered fleetingly what position he held in his home territory. A pack enforcer, perhaps, or a council member. He carried himself with too much authority to be a common wolf. As sleep began to claim her, Leora heard his voice from the darkness of her small bedroom. Why did you help me, Leora Vane? Truly? She considered the question, her mind already drifting toward dreams. Because the world has taken enough from me, she murmured. I won't let it take my humanity too. His response was so quiet she almost missed it. Some gifts cannot be repaid, but they will be remembered. In the deepest part of the night, Leora woke suddenly, her senses alert though she couldn't identify what had disturbed her sleep. The fire had died to barely glowing embers, casting the cottage in near total darkness. She listened, hearing only the occasional creak of timber as the wind tested the walls. Then she caught it. A presence, a powerful energy emanating from the small bedroom where Ronan slept. The hair on her arms rose as she detected a scent that couldn't possibly belong to the ragged traveler she'd rescued. It was the scent of an alpha, but not just any alpha. It carried notes of mountain pine, winter frost, and something ancient. The smell of power that extended beyond physical strength. Leora remained motionless, her heart pounding. Who had she invited into her home? The bedroom door remained closed, and eventually, the overwhelming sense of alpha presence receded like a tide drawing back from shore. Leora told herself she had imagined it, a dream born from too many nights alone, too many meals missed. By the time dawn painted her windows with pale light, she had almost convinced herself. She rose stiffly, her back protesting from a night spent on the hard floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and silence. Leora stoked the fire with her last pieces of kindling and melted snow for morning tea. A poor breakfast, but all she could offer. When she turned toward the bedroom to check on her guest, the door stood open. The room was empty. Ronan had vanished. Disappointment settled in her chest, heavier than she would have expected after knowing someone for only a night. Still, she understood. Travelers had their reasons for quick departures. It wasn't until she approached the bed to straighten the blankets that she noticed the small leather pouch left on the pillow. With trembling fingers, Leora opened it to find 5 gold coins, more money than she had seen in years, enough for food and firewood to last until spring. Impossible, she whispered, touching the coins to ensure they were real. That's when she heard it, the sound of horses approaching, many of them, moving at speed toward her cottage. Fear clutched at her throat. No one ever came here, and certainly not in numbers. Leora rushed to her window, peering out to see a procession that stole her breath. 6 riders on massive black horses were approaching, their armor gleaming in the morning light. Behind them rode at least a dozen more warriors, all bearing the same emblem on their chest plates, a wolf's head crowned with a crescent moon. The royal guard of the Vale Pack, the most powerful wolf pack in the Eastern Territories. Leora's hand flew to her mouth. What could possibly bring the Vale Royal Guard to her door? Had she unknowingly violated some boundary? Was this to be the day they finally drove her from even this small corner of existence? The riders halted before her cottage, and the leader dismounted. Tall and severe, with battle scars visible even at a distance, He approached her door and knocked with enough force to rattle the timbers. With no choice, Leora opened the door, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite her racing heart. "Leora Vane?" the warrior asked, his voice gruff. "Yes," she answered, lifting her chin despite feeling the overwhelming pressure of multiple alpha presences. "What business does the Veil Pack have with me?" The warrior's expression remained impassive. "By order of His Majesty, King Ronan Vale, you are summoned to the royal court." The world seemed to tilt beneath Leora's feet. "King Ronan Vale?" "The Alpha King," the warrior confirmed, watching her closely. "He who rules the eastern territories and the mountain packs." Memories of the night before flashed through Leora's mind. The stranger in worn clothes, his noble features, his penetrating amber eyes. The lingering scent of alpha power she had tried to dismiss as imagination. "There must be some mistake," she began, but the warrior cut her off. "His Majesty said you would doubt." He reached into his cloak and withdrew a folded piece of parchment sealed with wax bearing the same wolf and moon emblem. "He instructed me to give you this." With unsteady hands, Leora broke the seal and unfolded the note. The handwriting was bold and decisive. "Leora Vane, you shared your last bread with a stranger when you had nothing to spare. Now I ask you to share your wisdom with a kingdom that has everything but compassion. Come not as a subject, but as my honored guest. What was given in kindness will be returned in kind." Ronan Vale Leora looked up from the note to find all the warriors watching her, waiting. The morning sun illuminated the snow-covered forest around her cottage, making everything seem sharp and new and impossible. The beggar she had saved was the Alpha King, and he was calling her to his court. Everything she knew, her solitude, her struggle, her small existence at the edge of the world, was about to change. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. But as Leora clutched the note in her hand, she felt something she had not experienced in years, the flutter of hope, unfurling like the first green leaf after the longest winter. The journey to the eastern territories took 7 days. 7 days of riding through mountain passes on a horse too grand for a woman who had spent years at the edge of existence. 7 days of watching the landscape transform from the sparse, wind-swept forests of Thornridge to the lush, protected valleys of the Vale lands. 7 days to contemplate how a single act of kindness had altered the course of her life. Throughout the journey, the royal guards maintained a respectful distance, neither friendly nor hostile. Their leader, who introduced himself as Commander Alaric, spoke to her only when necessary, to announce when they would rest, where they would make camp, how many hours remained in their day's travel. He watched her with the cautious assessment of a man trained to see threats everywhere, even in an Omega healer with nothing but a small bundle of belongings and the clothes on her back. "Why has he summoned me?" Leora asked on the third night, as they sat around a campfire beneath a sky scattered with stars. "Truly, what could an Alpha King want with someone like me?" Alaric's weathered face revealed nothing. "It is not my place to speculate on His Majesty's intentions. But you must have some idea," she pressed. "Does he summon strangers to court often? Especially Omegas from disgraced families?" Something flickered across the commander's features. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration for her directness. "No," he admitted finally. "In the 5 years since His Majesty took the throne, he has never done anything like this." He studied her across the flames. "Whatever you did, it made an impression." Leora fell silent, remembering the night she had shared her fire, her blanket, her last bread with a man she believed to be a beggar. What had he seen in her that warranted this summons? And more troublingly, what did he expect from her now? On the morning of the 7th day, they crested a hill that offered her first view of Wolf's Haven, the ancestral seat of the Veil Pack, and home to the Alpha King. Leora's breath caught in her throat. The city sprawled across a valley protected on 3 sides by towering mountains. Unlike the humble stone and timber structures of Thornridge, Wolf's Haven was built of pale granite that gleamed golden in the morning light. At its center stood the royal palace, not a castle of harsh battlements and imposing walls, but a sprawling complex of elegant spires and terraced gardens that seemed to grow from the mountain itself. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Alaric, riding beside her, nodded. "The work of 15 generations. Every Alpha King or Queen has added to it." Something like pride softened his stern expression. "King Ronan has opened the lower gardens to all citizens, not just pack members. the first to do so in 3 centuries. This small detail offered Leora her first real insight into the man who had appeared at her door as a beggar. A king who opened royal gardens to commoners might indeed value compassion over convention. As their party descended into the valley, Leora became aware of the sheer scale of the city. Thousands of people moved through wide streets lined with flowering trees. Markets bustled with activity. Children played in public squares. Wolves in their shifted forms ran alongside humans in an integration she had never witnessed in Thornridge, where shifting was reserved for ceremonies and combat. The closer they drew to the palace, the more aware Leora became of her appearance. Her simple dress now travel-worn, her hair windblown, her hands rough from years of work. She was about to enter the court of the most powerful alpha in the Eastern Territories, looking like exactly what she was, a poor Omega from the edge of nowhere. "Commander," she said quietly, "I'm hardly presentable for a royal court." Alaric glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "His Majesty saw you as you were and still sent for you. But," he added, noting her discomfort, "arrangements have been made for your arrival. The king anticipated your concerns." Indeed, instead of proceeding directly to the palace, their party diverted to an elegant building near its gates. Here, Leora was greeted by a woman who introduced herself as Lady Serena, the king's cousin, and a member of his inner council. "Welcome to Wolf's Haven, Miss Vane," Lady Serena said, her smile genuine, though her eyes held the same assessment Leora had seen in Alaric's. "His Majesty has asked that you be given time to rest from your journey before presenting yourself at court." Leora was led to chambers more luxurious than anything she had ever imagined. A suite of rooms with windows overlooking the city, furnished with silk and velvet and polished wood. Servants appeared with heated water for bathing, clothes for her to choose from, and a meal that made her previous dinner of half a piece of bread seem like a distant dream. When the door closed behind them, Leora stood alone in the center of this unexpected luxury, feeling more out of place than she ever had in her life. What game was the Alpha King playing? And what role had he cast her in? 3 hours later, freshly bathed and dressed in a gown of deep forest green that complemented her eyes and copper hair, Leora followed a palace attendant through corridors of increasing grandeur. The dress was simpler than most court fashions, she'd been told, but its fabric was finer than anything she'd ever touched. Around her neck hung a pendant of silver and moonstone, a gift left with the clothes, though no note indicated who had chosen it for her. They passed wolves in human form, wearing the insignia of various packs, nobles in rich attire, servants moving efficiently about their duties. Many glanced at Leora with undisguised curiosity. News of her arrival had clearly spread, though she doubted anyone knew exactly who she was or why she had been summoned. The attendant stopped before massive double doors, carved with the history of the Vale Pack, wolves running beneath moon phases, battles and coronations, seasons changing across an ancient forest. 2 guards stood at attention, their armor bearing the now familiar wolf and crescent emblem. "Miss Leora Vane," the attendant announced, "summoned by His Majesty." The guards exchanged a glance before opening the doors, revealing the throne room beyond. Leora took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward into a new chapter of her life. The throne room of Wolf's Haven was a testament to nature rather than human artifice. The space had been carved from the mountain itself, with walls of polished stone rising to a ceiling open to the sky. A central pathway of marble led to a dais where a throne stood, not a gaudy seat of gold, but one carved from a single massive piece of ancient wood, inlaid with silver that caught the light filtering down from above. And upon that throne sat the man she had known as Ronan the Beggar. Gone were the ragged clothes and frost-covered cloak. King Ronan Vale wore a tunic of midnight blue, beneath light armor of burnished silver. A crown of intertwined silver branches rested upon his dark hair, which was now neatly trimmed. His beard, too, had been shaped to accentuate rather than hide the strong lines of his jaw. But his eyes, those unusual amber eyes that had seemed to see through her, remained exactly as she remembered them. The throne room was filled with courtiers and officials who turned to stare as Leora walked the long path toward their king. She felt their curiosity, their judgment, their speculation, an unknown Omega in their midst, summoned by royal command. She forced herself to focus only on the path ahead, on maintaining her dignity with each step. When she reached the appropriate distance from the throne, Leora executed a curtsy as Lady Serena had hastily instructed her. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I have come as you requested." For a long moment, Ronan simply looked at her, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. The throne room fell silent, the tension palpable. Then the Alpha King rose from his throne, descended the 3 steps of the dais, and did something that caused a ripple of shock through the assembled court. He bowed to her. Not the slight nod of acknowledgement a king might offer a noble visitor, but a proper bow of respect, one equal to equal. "Leora Vane," he said, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "You honor us with your presence." The court's reaction was immediate. Whispers, sharp intakes of breath, sense of surprise and confusion blooming throughout the room. Leora herself stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented gesture. King Ronan straightened, a faint smile touching his lips as he observed the effect of his actions. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Yes, Your Majesty," she managed. "Your guards were most attentive." "Good." He gestured to the space beside his throne where a chair had been placed, smaller than the royal seat, but clearly one of honor. "Join me. There is much to discuss." Another wave of whispers swept through the court as Leora ascended the dais and took the offered seat. From this vantage, she could see the entire assembly, nobles wearing their pack colors, military leaders in armor similar to Alaric's, officials with insignia denoting their responsibilities in the kingdom, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "My friends," King Ronan addressed the court, returning to his throne, "Miss Vane comes to us from the Western Mountains, where she has served her community as a healer, despite great personal hardship." His gaze swept the assembly. "She has agreed to lend us her knowledge and perspective on matters of importance to our kingdom. I expect her to be treated with all the respect due an honored guest of the crown." No explanation of how they had met, of why a king had appeared at her door disguised as a beggar, of what specific knowledge she possessed that could possibly be of value to this wealthy, powerful court. Just the clear expectation that his word was law, his judgment beyond questioning. A man stepped forward from the group closest to the throne, tall and lean, with silver threading his dark hair and cold calculation in his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone deferential, though his posture suggested he was accustomed to being heard. "While we welcome any who might bring value to your council, perhaps you might enlighten us as to Miss Vane's specific qualifications." Leora tensed, sensing the challenge beneath the politely phrased question. King Ronan's expression remained neutral, but Leora noticed his scent shift subtly, a warning that only another wolf would detect. "Lord Kestrel, I was unaware that I needed to justify my choices to my advisory council." The older man inclined his head. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. We are simply eager to understand how best to utilize Miss Vane's talents." "Miss Vane possesses something rare in our court," Ronan replied. "Compassion without expectation of reward, wisdom born of hardship, and courage in the face of abandonment." His gaze hardened. "Qualities I find increasingly valuable as we face the challenges before us." Lord Kestrel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, Your Majesty. We look forward to benefiting from such uncommon virtues." The court session continued, dealing with matters of state that meant little to Leora. Border disputes with neighboring pacts, reports of unusually harsh weather affecting crops in the outer territories, preparations for the upcoming Winter Moon Festival. Throughout it all, she sat quietly, observing the dynamics of power that flowed through the room like invisible currents. King Ronan ruled with authority, tempered by attentiveness. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions rather than issuing immediate judgments, and showed particular interest in how policies would affect the common citizens, rather than just the noble houses. Yet beneath his measured responses, Leora sensed a tension, as if the king were engaged in a chess match with opponents she couldn't identify. When the formal court session ended, most of the attendees filed out, though a smaller group remained, what appeared to be the king's inner council, including Lord Kestrel and Lady Serena. As the great doors closed, leaving only this select group, the atmosphere shifted from formal to focused. "Now," King Ronan said, turning to address those who remained, "let us speak plainly of the matter that cannot wait." His gaze swept the circle. The raids along our northern villages have increased. 3 more attacks in the past week alone. A muscular man with a commander's insignia stepped forward, spreading a map on the table that had been brought forth. The pattern is becoming clear, Your Majesty. They strike at night, taking food stores and winter supplies. But the latest attack was different. His finger traced a location on the map. They took people, 7 young women and 3 children. Leora felt a chill run through her at the words. Slaves were forbidden in the Eastern Territories, had been for generations, but the practice persisted in shadowy corners of the world. Survivors? King Ronan asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Few, the commander replied grimly. Those who resisted were killed, but one witness reported something unusual. He hesitated, glancing at Leora. The king noticed. Miss Vane has my complete confidence, Commander Thorne. Speak freely. Commander Thorne nodded. The witness claims the raiders weren't ordinary bandits. They shifted only partially, maintaining human form but with wolf strength and speed. And their eyes? He paused. Their eyes were black, entirely black, with no whites visible. A heavy silence fell over the council. Leora felt the weight of unspoken knowledge, of a threat understood by everyone but her. Half shifts with black eyes, Lord Kestrel murmured. The rumors are true, then. The Blood Moon Pack has returned. The name sent a visible ripple through the gathered advisors. Even Lady Serena, who had seemed unflappable, paled slightly. We don't know that for certain, said an older woman whose robes marked her as a scholar or record keeper. The Blood Moon Pack was destroyed over 2 centuries ago, their alpha line extinguished, their territories divided among the loyal packs. History written by the victors, historian Mara, Lord Kestrel replied smoothly. Perhaps not all were destroyed. Perhaps some escaped, nursed their grievances, and waited for the right moment to return. Whatever their identity, King Ronan cut in, they threaten our people and must be stopped. He turned to Commander Thorne. Increase patrols along all northern villages. No settlement is to be left unprotected, no matter how small. At once, Your Majesty. And the captives? Lady Serena asked. Do we know where they were taken? Commander Thorne shook his head. Their trail vanishes at the Blackwater River. It's as if they... He hesitated again. As if they simply disappeared. No one simply disappears, King Ronan said firmly. Dispatch our best trackers. I want those people found. The council continued discussing strategy, resources, and precautions, while Leora listened, trying to understand her place in all this. She was no warrior, no strategist, no noble with territories to defend. Why had the king brought her into this inner circle? As if sensing her confusion, King Ronan eventually turned to her. You've been quiet, Miss Vane. What are your thoughts? All eyes turned to her, most with barely concealed skepticism. Leora swallowed, gathering her courage. I'm wondering about the black eyes, Your Majesty, she said carefully. In my mother's healing work, we sometimes encountered unusual symptoms caused not by injuries or common illness, but by poisoning or certain rare plants. Historian Mara leaned forward with interest. You believe these raiders might be using some sort of substance to enhance their abilities? To achieve partial shifting? It's possible, Leora admitted. There are herbs in the high mountains that can induce states similar to shifting. Heightened strength, sharper senses, reduced sensitivity to pain. But they come with costs. Aggression, loss of rational thought. She met the king's amber gaze directly. Black eyes. Lord Kestrel made a dismissive sound. Folk remedies and superstition. The Blood Moon Pack practiced dark rituals to enhance their power. That's the more likely explanation. Perhaps, King Ronan said, his gaze still on Leora. But I've learned not to dismiss knowledge simply because it comes from unexpected sources. To the council, he added, investigate both possibilities. If these raiders are using substances to enhance their abilities, knowing which ones might give us an advantage. The meeting concluded shortly after, with assignments distributed and plans made for increased security. As the advisors filed out, King Ronan gestured for Leora to remain. When they were alone, save for 2 guards stationed at a discreet distance, he finally addressed what hung between them. You must have questions, he said, his formal court manner softening slightly. Dozens, Leora admitted, beginning with why an Alpha King was wandering my territory in disguise. A faint smile touched his lips. Not exactly in disguise. More, without the trappings of office. He moved to a window overlooking the city below, gesturing for her to join him. Do you know what happens when a king travels with his retinue? His crown? His banners? Leora shook her head. He sees only what people wish him to see. Smiling faces, swept streets, rehearsed gratitude. His expression hardened. I wanted to see the truth of how people live in the outer territories under my rule. So I traveled alone, on foot, through villages and towns at the edges of my kingdom. And what did you find? Leora asked quietly. Hardship I hadn't been told about. Suffering my advisors never mentioned in their reports. His hands gripped the window ledge. And in one small cottage at the edge of everything, I found more humanity than in all my court. Leora felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise. I only did what anyone would do. No, he said firmly. You did what few would do. You had one piece of bread, your last food, and you shared it with a stranger who could offer you nothing in return. His amber eyes held hers. Do you know how rare that is, Leora Vane? To give without calculation, to help without agenda? She didn't know how to respond to the intensity in his gaze, the conviction in his words. This powerful alpha, ruler of territories vaster than she could imagine, spoke as if her small act of kindness were something precious and profound. What do you want from me? She asked finally. The question that had haunted her throughout the journey, throughout the court session, throughout this strange day. I'm no diplomat or strategist. I'm barely even a healer anymore. What I want, he said quietly, is your perspective, your honesty, your unwillingness to look away from suffering. He gestured toward the door through which his advisors had departed. My council is filled with wolves who understand power and politics. What it lacks is someone who understands mercy. The weight of his words settled on her shoulders. And if I can't be what you need, you already are what I need, he said simply. You proved that the moment you opened your door to a stranger in a storm. Before she could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the chamber door. Commander Alaric entered, his expression grim. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but we've received word from the northern border. Another village has been attacked. His gaze flicked briefly to Leora before returning to his king. There's something else. The raiders left a message this time, carved into the village headman's door. What message? Ronan demanded. The true Alpha returns. Blood calls to blood. Alaric paused. And below it, Your Majesty, they left a symbol, a wolf's head beneath a red moon. King Ronan's face hardened, his scent shifting to one of barely controlled fury. For the first time, Leora glimpsed the full power of the Alpha beneath the measured facade of the king. Summon the War Council, he ordered, and double the palace guard. If the Blood Moon Pack has truly returned, they won't stop at border villages. They'll come for the heart of our territory. His gaze met Leora's briefly. They'll come for Wolf's Haven. As Alaric departed to carry out the king's orders, Leora found herself standing at the precipice of events far larger and more dangerous than anything she had imagined when she opened her door to a stranger 7 nights ago. The Alpha King had brought her from the edge of nothing to the center of a gathering storm. A healer with no pack, no position, no power beyond her knowledge of herbs and her stubborn will to survive. What place could she possibly have in the conflict to come? Yet as King Ronan turned back to her, determination hardening his noble features, she knew she would not be returning to her solitary cottage anytime soon. Whatever had begun that night beside her dying fire, whatever bond had formed between an Omega healer and an Alpha King, it was still unfolding, still drawing them toward a shared destiny neither could fully see. I need to know everything about the herbs you mentioned, he said, his voice low and urgent. If these raiders are using substances to enhance their abilities, to transform themselves into something between wolf and human, I'll help however I can, Leora promised, pushing aside her doubts. This was no longer about her, or even about the strange connection between herself and the king. It was about protecting innocent people, people like those in her own village who, despite their treatment of her family, deserved to live without fear. As twilight descended over Wolf's Haven, painting the white stone city in shades of amber and gold, Leora Vane found herself walking alongside an Alpha King toward a war council, her simple healer's knowledge suddenly as valuable as any warrior's sword. The journey that had begun with a single piece of shared bread was leading her into the heart of a conflict centuries in the making. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the kingdom's borders, Enemies with eyes as black as midnight were coming ever closer, carrying with them an ancient grudge and a thirst for vengeance that threatened everything Ronan Vale had built. For better or worse, Leora was now part of this story, no longer watching from the edges of the world, but standing at its center, where every decision, every piece of knowledge, every act of compassion or cruelty would shape the fate of thousands. And as she walked beside the king she had once thought a beggar, she couldn't help but wonder, had she saved him that night in the storm, or had he saved her? And in the days to come, which of them would need saving again? 3 weeks had passed since Leora's arrival at Wolf's Haven, and in that time, the world had transformed around her. The golden autumn had surrendered to winter's first breath, dusting the palace gardens with frost each morning. Inside the palace walls, preparations for war overshadowed the approaching Winter Moon Festival, with warriors training in courtyards once reserved for celebrations. And Leora herself had changed, shedding the isolation of her previous life like an outgrown skin. The timid Omega, who had arrived in borrowed finery, now walked the palace corridors with purpose, her knowledge sought by healers and strategists alike. Her small chamber in the eastern wing had become a makeshift laboratory, filled with plants gathered by royal foragers under her direction, samples meticulously labeled and arranged for study. The Blood Moon Pack's attacks had continued. 6 more villages raided, more supplies stolen, more people taken. But thanks to Leora's insights, they now understood their enemy better. The raiders were indeed using mountain herbs to enhance their abilities, a concoction she had identified from descriptions of their behavior and the distinctive black eyes reported by survivors. Nightshade root, moon thistle, and wolf's bane, she explained to the War Council on a cold morning, as wind rattled the chamber windows. Combined in specific proportions and prepared under a waning moon, it allows them to access their wolf strength while maintaining human form, but at tremendous cost. What cost? King Ronan asked. He sat at the head of the council table, dark shadows beneath his eyes betraying nights of little sleep. Their minds, Leora said simply. Extended use destroys rational thought, eventually leading to madness. And their bodies, the concoction literally burns through their life force. I doubt any raider survives more than a dozen transformations. Lord Kestrel, who had remained skeptical of Leora despite her contributions, leaned forward. If this substance is so destructive, why use it at all? The Blood Moon Alpha must know he's sacrificing his own people. Because he isn't using it himself, Leora replied, meeting the Lord's cold gaze directly. In the past weeks, she had learned to hold her ground in these council sessions. Only his foot soldiers take the concoction. The leaders, those giving orders, show no signs of using it. Commander Alaric nodded grimly. That matches our scouts' reports. The raiding parties are led by wolves who remain clear-eyed and controlled while their followers fight with berserker rage. Expendable pawns, King Ronan concluded, his expression dark. Used and discarded once they've served their purpose. The discussion continued, focusing on defenses and strategies, but Leora found her attention drawn repeatedly to the Alpha King. Though he maintained his commanding presence, she sensed a growing weariness in him, not just physical exhaustion, but a deeper burden. The weight of his crown, the responsibility for thousands of lives, the knowledge that his enemies targeted innocent villagers to draw him out. Later that day, as twilight painted the sky in shades of indigo, Leora found herself walking alone in the palace's inner garden. Despite the chill, she needed fresh air after hours bent over her workbench, testing combinations of herbs that might counteract the Blood Moon Pack's concoction. The garden was empty save for a solitary figure standing beside a frozen fountain. King Ronan, his back to her, seemingly lost in thought. Leora hesitated, uncertain whether to disturb him or retreat quietly. Before she could decide, he spoke without turning. Your footsteps are lighter than most, Leora Vane, but a wolf's hearing catches even the softest tread. Forgive me, Your Majesty, she said, approaching slowly. I didn't mean to intrude. When he turned to face her, the fading light revealed lines of tension around his eyes and mouth that he kept carefully masked during council sessions. Your presence is never an intrusion. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Despite the formality that necessarily existed between them, king and subject, alpha and omega, these quiet moments had become increasingly common in recent weeks. brief interludes where rank seemed to matter less than the strange connection that had begun in her small cottage. 3 more villages have requested evacuation, Ronan said finally. Families abandoning homes they've held for generations, all because I cannot guarantee their safety. The self-recrimination in his voice surprised her. You're doing everything possible to protect them. Am I? He turned to look at her directly. Or am I placing strategy above their immediate welfare, holding positions for tactical advantage while people suffer? Leora considered her words carefully. In their private conversations, the king had made it clear he valued her honesty above pleasant falsehoods. You're balancing impossible choices. Protect individual villages at the cost of spreading your forces too thin, or concentrate your strength where it can be most effective. And meanwhile, innocents pay the price for my calculations. His hands tightened on the stone edge of the fountain. This is not the king I meant to be, Leora. The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep within her. This powerful alpha, ruler of vast territories, carried doubts as heavy as any she had known in her years of isolation. What kind of king did you mean to be? She asked softly. His amber gaze lifted to the mountains visible beyond the palace walls. One who protected rather than merely ruled. One who earned loyalty through justice rather than demanding it through strength. A faint, bitter smile touched his lips. Idealist notions, perhaps. My council certainly thinks so. I don't, Leora said with quiet conviction. I've seen how you listen to reports from the smallest villages with the same attention you give to noble houses. How you ask after the welfare of common people before considering political advantages. She took a step closer, emboldened by the importance of what she needed him to understand. The Blood Moon Pack attacks because you represent everything they despise. An alpha who values compassion alongside power. Something shifted in Ronan's expression. A softening. A moment of clarity breaking through the weight of responsibility. You see much, Leora Vane. I was invisible for years, she replied simply. It teaches one to observe. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then a guard appeared at the garden entrance, bowing deeply. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. Lady Serena requests your presence in the Eastern Tower. A messenger has arrived from the northern border. Ronan's expression immediately shifted back to the composed mask of kingship. Tell her I'll come at once. As the guard departed, he turned back to Leora. Duty calls as always. Of course, Your Majesty. He took a step to leave, then paused. Join me for the evening meal in my private chambers tonight. There's something I wish to discuss with you. The invitation sent an unexpected flutter through Leora's chest. I would be honored. With a final nod, the Alpha King departed, leaving Leora alone with her thoughts and the gathering darkness of winter's early evening. Hours later, having changed into a simple but elegant gown of deep blue provided by the palace staff, Leora was escorted to the king's private dining chamber. Unlike the grand formal spaces where state dinners were held, this room reflected a more personal taste. Warm wooden panels rather than cold stone, shelves lined with books rather than ceremonial weapons, a fire crackling in a hearth large enough to ward off winter's chill. King Ronan awaited her, having shed his formal court attire for simpler clothing that reminded her of their first meeting, though of much finer quality than the beggar's rags he had worn that night. Without his crown, with the firelight softening his features, he seemed both more approachable and somehow more real. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to the table where a modest meal had been set for 2. No servants hovered nearby, an unusual intimacy that Leora tried not to read too much into. As they ate, their conversation remained focused on practical matters, progress with her herbal research, reports from border patrols, preparations for the coming winter. But beneath the ordinary words, Leora sensed a tension, as if Ronan were working his way toward something difficult to express. Finally, as they finished their meal, he set aside his goblet and met her gaze directly. I've received intelligence about the Blood Moon Pack's next target. Leora set down her own cup, instantly alert. Another border village? No. His expression grew grave. They plan to strike at the heart of our kingdom, at the Winter Moon Festival, when thousands gather in Wolf's Haven's central square. The implications were chilling. A massacre in the capital would spread terror throughout the territories. Precisely their intent. Ronan rose and moved to stand before the fire, his profile etched in gold against the flames. But their information is incomplete. They believe I'll be attending the festival, making a traditional appearance to light the ceremonial pyre. You won't be there, Leora guessed, understanding dawning. You'll be elsewhere, leading a counterattack while they exposed themselves. That was my original plan, he acknowledged, but it would place thousands of innocent citizens at risk, turning them into bait for my trap. His gaze returned to hers, intense and searching. Is that the action of a just king, Leora? To use his own people as pawns? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Leora considered it carefully, recognizing that her answer mattered to him in ways that went beyond strategy. A king who sees his people only as means to an end is no true king, she said finally. But there must be another way, one that protects the innocent while still confronting the threat. Something like relief flickered across Ronan's features. My thoughts exactly, which brings me to why I asked you here tonight. He returned to the table, retrieving a scroll from a nearby cabinet. This is what we know of the Blood Moon Pack's leadership. He unrolled the parchment, revealing sketches of 3 wolves, 2 men and a woman, all with the hard-edged look of warriors who had survived countless battles. Annotations beside each drawing detailed known abilities and sightings. Their alpha is Darius Blood Moon, Ronan explained, indicating the central figure, a man with a jagged scar cutting across his right eye. Believed to be the last surviving member of the original Blood Moon lineage, his lieutenants are Mara Nightshade and Corvin Dusk, both born to other packs, but sworn to his service. Leora studied the faces, committing them to memory. What's your plan? Not mine, Ronan said unexpectedly. Ours. Ours? The Blood Moon Pack targets innocents because they believe strength is the only virtue worth possessing. They use their own people as disposable weapons. His amber eyes held hers. I need to show them, and my kingdom, that there is power in mercy, in healing, rather than harming. Understanding dawned slowly. You want to cure the raiders rather than kill them, if possible, he confirmed. You said yourself they're victims of the concoction, their minds and bodies being destroyed. If we could reverse the effects, we'd undermine Darius Blood Moon's power base while demonstrating a different kind of strength, Leora finished, her mind already racing through possibilities. It could work, but creating such a remedy would require ingredients found only in Blood Moon territory, Ronan said grimly. Specifically, in the ruins of their ancestral holding in the northern mountains. The implications struck Leora like a physical blow. You intend to go there yourself, with a small team. While the main force prepares visible defenses for the festival, drawing the Blood Moon Pack's attention. It's incredibly dangerous, Leora protested. If Darius discovers the Alpha King in his territory, then I face him directly, as perhaps I should have from the beginning. Ronan's expression hardened. But I need someone with me who understands which plants to gather, how to prepare them correctly. The request hung unspoken between them. Leora's heart raced as she comprehended what he was asking. You want me to accompany you into enemy territory. I would not ask if there were any other option. His voice softened. Nor would I ask if I did not believe you capable. 1,000 objections rose in Leora's mind. She was no warrior, had never ventured beyond her own small territory before coming to Wolf's Haven, had spent years avoiding conflict rather than stepping into its path. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper truth. Whatever bond had formed between them that night in her cottage had continued to grow, drawing them into a shared destiny neither had anticipated. When do we leave? She asked, her decision made even as fear fluttered in her chest. Relief and something warmer flashed in Ronan's eyes. Tomorrow, before dawn. Commander Alaric and 2 of his most trusted warriors will accompany us. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. Thank you, Leora. The touch sent warmth spiraling through her, a sensation both unfamiliar and increasingly precious. In the 3 weeks since her arrival, something had shifted between them. Something neither had named, but both felt with increasing intensity. An Alpha King and an Omega Healer, drawn together by circumstance, but held by something far more complex. I should prepare, she said, gently withdrawing her hand. The northern mountains will be deep in winter's grip. I'll need to know exactly which plants we seek. Ronan nodded, allowing her the retreat. My library has texts on the northern flora, ancient volumes from before the Blood Moon Pack's fall. They spent the next hour reviewing these texts, heads bent together over yellowed pages, identifying the rare plants they would need. Throughout their work, Leora remained acutely aware of Ronan's proximity, of his scent, mountain pine and winter frost, that had become so familiar to her. of the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this moment, planning a dangerous mission that might save or doom his kingdom. As midnight approached, Leora gathered the notes she had made and prepared to return to her chambers. At the door, she paused, a question that had lingered for weeks finally finding voice. "Why did you come to my cottage that night? Of all the places in your kingdom, why the farthest edge of Thornridge?" Ronan considered her for a long moment, firelight casting shadows across his noble features. "I could say it was chance, or fate, but the truth is simpler." His voice lowered. "I had traveled for weeks through my territories, seeing much that troubled me. That night, as the storm worsened, I felt drawn to continue beyond the borders of Thornridge, as if something waited there that I needed to find." A faint smile touched his lips. Or perhaps someone, the admission hung between them, waited with possibilities neither was ready to fully explore. Leora nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. "Until dawn then, Your Majesty." Until dawn, Leora Vane. They departed Wolf's Haven as the first pale light touched the eastern sky. A small party of 5 riding swift, sure-footed mountain horses. Commander Alaric led the way, with his 2 chosen warriors, twins named Kira and Kale, known for their exceptional tracking abilities, flanking Ronan and Leora. All wore simple traveling clothes, their weapons concealed, nothing to identify the Alpha King among them. 3 days of hard riding brought them to the northern border, where the cultivated lands of the Vale Pack gave way to wild, untamed wilderness. Here the mountains rose higher, their peaks permanently white with snow, their slopes covered in ancient forests, untouched by human hands for centuries. "Blood Moon territory begins beyond that ridge," Alaric said as they made camp on the 3rd night, gesturing to a jagged line of stone silhouetted against the starlit sky. "From here, we travel with utmost caution. No fires, no shifted forms that might be detected." Leora, exhausted from days in the saddle but determined not to show weakness, nodded her understanding. She had spent the journey reviewing her knowledge of the plants they sought, preparing for the moment when their success or failure would rest on her ability to identify the right specimens in the midst of winter's grip. As the others arranged the cold camp, Ronan joined her at the edge of a small clearing, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "How are you holding up?" "Well enough," she replied, pulling her cloak tighter against the mountain chill. "Though I never imagined I'd travel so far from home. Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your cottage at the edge of Thornridge?" Leora considered the question seriously. "I miss its simplicity, the quiet, the freedom to be invisible." She gazed up at the vast sweep of stars overhead. "But I don't miss the loneliness, or the feeling that my life had no purpose beyond survival." Ronan's eyes reflected the starlight as he studied her face. "And now? Now I'm riding into enemy territory with an Alpha King on a mission that might save or doom his kingdom," she said with a faint smile. "It's rather more purpose than I ever expected." A low chuckle escaped him, a rare sound that Leora had heard only a handful of times during their acquaintance. "Life has strange currents, Leora Vane. 3 weeks ago I was a beggar at your door. Now you're a valued advisor at mine. And what will I be 3 weeks from now?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a softening, a momentary vulnerability quickly mastered. "That," he said quietly, "depends on many things, including whether we survive the coming days." Before she could respond, Alaric approached, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, the scouts have returned. Blood Moon sentries patrol the ridge ahead. We'll need to find another path." The moment broken, Ronan returned to his role as leader, discussing options with his commander, while Leora retreated to her bedroll, her question lingering unanswered in the cold mountain air. Dawn brought heavy clouds and the threat of snow as they altered their course, taking a steeper, more treacherous path to avoid detection. By midday, they had entered the heart of Blood Moon territory, a landscape of primal beauty and subtle menace, where ancient trees grew in twisted forms and streams ran dark with minerals from deep within the mountains. "The ancestral holding should lie in the valley beyond that peak," Alaric said, consulting a map so old its edges crumbled at his touch. "Once the greatest stronghold in the northern territories, now abandoned for 2 centuries. "Not entirely abandoned," Kira corrected, her keen eyes scanning the distant slopes. "Smoke rises from within the valley. Someone maintains a presence there. Darius himself, perhaps," Ronan murmured, reclaiming his ancestors' seat. They proceeded with increased caution, leaving their horses concealed in a sheltered grove and continuing on foot. The twins scouted ahead, their movements silent despite the carpet of fallen leaves and twigs that covered the forest floor. Leora followed as carefully as she could, grateful for Ronan's steadying hand when the terrain proved particularly challenging. As they crested a final ridge, the Blood Moon Pack's ancestral home came into view, a fortress built into the side of a mountain, its stone walls weathered but still imposing, its towers reaching toward the leaden sky like accusing fingers. Unlike the elegant, organic architecture of Wolf's Haven, this structure had been designed for war, every line of it speaking of defiance and dominance. The gardens would have been on the southern terraces, Leora said, recalling the ancient texts they had studied, protected from the harshest winds, catching the most sunlight. Alaric studied the fortress through narrowed eyes. I see movement near the main gates, at least a dozen guards, but the southern approach appears unattended. Overconfidence, Ronan suggested. They don't expect enemies to reach this far into their territory, and they're focusing their strength on their raiding parties. Or a trap, Cale countered grimly, luring us exactly where they want us. The possibility hung heavy in the cold air. Leora looked to Ronan, seeing the weight of decision in his features. Everything rested on this moment. The lives of his people, the future of his kingdom, their own survival. If they retreated now, the Blood Moon Pack would strike at the Winter Moon Festival, causing untold casualties. If they proceeded into what might be a trap. "We continue as planned," the Alpha King said finally. "But we separate. Alaric, you and the twins create a diversion at the northern approach. Nothing that reveals our true numbers or identity, just enough to draw attention away from the southern terraces." His gaze moved to Leora. "You and I will retrieve the plants we need." The commander clearly disliked splitting their already small force, but he nodded his acceptance of the order. "Be cautious, Your Majesty. If Darius Bloodmoon is indeed within those walls, then it's time he and I met face to face," Ronan said quietly. "One way or another, this conflict must end." As Alaric and the twins departed to position themselves for the diversion, Leora found herself alone with Ronan, the fortress looming before them like a physical manifestation of the threat facing his kingdom. "You don't have to do this," he said unexpectedly. "I can find the plants with your descriptions. You could wait here, where it's safer." Leora met his gaze steadily. "I didn't travel this far to wait on the sidelines, Your Majesty." A smile touched his lips, proud, genuine, warming his amber eyes. "No, I don't suppose you did." He offered his hand. "Shall we then?" Together they began their descent toward the southern terraces, moving from shadow to shadow as the first snowflakes began to spiral down from the darkening sky. In the distance they heard the beginning of Alaric's diversion, shouts, and the clash of metal, drawing guards from the southern approach as planned. The ancient gardens had fallen into wild disarray over the centuries, terraced beds now overgrown with a tangle of plants competing for dominance. Yet to Leora's practiced eye, patterns remained. Medicinal herbs grouped according to properties, rare specimens given pride of place in protected niches. "There," she whispered, pointing to a sheltered corner where plants with distinctive silver-backed leaves grew in a dense cluster. Moon thistle, still alive despite the season. Working quickly, she harvested what they needed while Ronan stood guard, his senses alert for any approach. From the far side of the fortress, the sounds of fighting continued. Alaric and the twins, ensuring the attention of the Blood Moon guards, remained fixed elsewhere. "The wolf's bane should be nearby," Leora murmured, scanning the tangled growth. "It always grows in the shadow of something larger, something that protects it from direct sunlight." A movement at the edge of her vision made her freeze. Beyond the garden wall, a figure had appeared, a woman whose features matched one of the sketches Ronan had shown her. Mara Nightshade, one of Darius Bloodmoon's lieutenants. Leora reached for Ronan's arm in warning, but he had already sensed the presence. With silent communication born of their weeks working together, they retreated deeper into the overgrown garden, concealing themselves behind a stone bench overtaken by creeping vines. Mara entered the garden slowly, her movements casual, but her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. She carried no visible weapons, but her posture suggested she was prepared for conflict at any moment. "I know you're here," she called, her voice carrying clearly through the snow-laden air. "I can smell you. An alpha, and something else. Something unexpected. A predatory smile curved her lips. "Come out, little mice." Darius would be so disappointed to miss greeting his royal visitor. Ronan's hand tightened on Leora's arm, a warning to remain hidden, to not react to the provocation. But the decision was taken from them, as 4 more Blood Moon warriors entered the garden from different directions, effectively surrounding their position. "Found you," Mara said with satisfaction, as one of the warriors pointed to their hiding place. "Now let's see who has been trespassing in our territory." With no choice left, Ronan stood, positioning himself protectively in front of Leora. "I believe your alpha has been expecting me." Recognition dawned in Mara's eyes, followed by triumph. King Ronan Vale. What an unexpected honor. Her gaze shifted to Leora as she too stood, and with an Omega companion. "How progressive of you." "I've come to speak with Darius Bloodmoon," Ronan said, his voice carrying the authority of his position despite their precarious situation. "Take us to him." Mara's laugh was cold. "Oh, I intend to. He's been planning your welcome for some time." She gestured to her warriors. "Disarm him. Bring them both." As the warriors approached, Leora felt fear twist in her stomach. They had come so close. The moon thistle secured in her pouch. The wolf's bane still unfound. So close to creating the remedy that might have saved countless lives. Now they would face Darius Bloodmoon not from a position of strength, but as captives. Yet as Ronan's eyes met hers briefly before they were separated and led toward the fortress, she saw not defeat, but determination. Whatever awaited them within those ancient walls, their story was not yet finished. And somewhere in the swirling snow beyond the garden, Alaric and the twins remained free. 3 wolves loyal to their alpha king, 3 possible allies in what was to come. The path that had begun with a shared piece of bread had led Leora Vane from the edge of nothing to the heart of a centuries-old conflict. What would happen next would depend on courage, on loyalty, on the strange bond that had formed between an Omega healer and an Alpha King, and perhaps most of all, on the power of mercy to transform even the darkest of circumstances into something unexpected and new. The Winter Moon Festival came to Wolf's Haven, as it had for centuries before, with bonfires blazing against the night sky, music floating through streets decorated with silver ribbons, and the laughter of children who had never known the fear that had gripped the kingdom just weeks earlier. From the palace balcony overlooking the central square, Leora Vane watched the celebrations with a sense of wonder that had not diminished in the 2 months since her return from Blood Moon territory. Her hands, once rough from years of solitary work, now bore new calluses from the countless hours spent preparing the remedy that had changed everything. "Still not comfortable with crowds?" a familiar voice asked, as King Ronan joined her at the balcony's edge, the silver branches of his crown catching the moonlight. "I'm learning," she replied with a smile, "though I prefer watching from a distance." "Some habits are hard to break," he agreed, his amber eyes warm as they rested on her face. The healer who lived at the edge of everything, observing but rarely seen. The description no longer fit her life, though parts of her nature remained unchanged. The shy, solitary Omega still existed beneath the woman who now wore the silver pendant of the Royal Advisor on Healing Arts, who taught apprentices in the newly established School of Medicinal Knowledge, who had the ear of the Alpha King himself. Below them, the festival reached its peak, as dancers in wolf masks performed the traditional moon dance, their movements telling the ancient story of how wolves first learned to shift into human form beneath the winter moon's light. "Do you ever think about that night?" Leora asked quietly. "When you arrived at my cottage door?" Ronan's expression softened. "Often, though my memories of near freezing to death are somewhat overshadowed by what came after." What came after? Such a simple phrase for events that had transformed a kingdom. Their capture in the Blood Moon Fortress had led not to execution, but to an unexpected confrontation between Ronan and Darius Bloodmoon, alpha to alpha, king to would-be king. Not with claws and fangs as tradition demanded, but with words and principles, and finally, with mercy. For when Alaric and the twins had created their planned diversion, they had discovered something unexpected. The captives Darius had taken from border villages, including children barely old enough to shift. While Ronan and Leora faced the Blood Moon Alpha in his ancestral hall, Alaric had freed these prisoners, undermining Darius's position from within. And then, in a moment that would be retold in songs for generations, King Ronan Vale had offered not vengeance, but healing. The knowledge Leora had gathered, the remedy they had come to create, offered freely to cure the raiders whose minds and bodies were being destroyed by Darius's ambition. "Your warriors are dying for your revenge," Ronan had told his adversary as they stood in the great hall of the fortress, surrounded by blood moon warriors with black, empty eyes. "But they could live for a future of peace. The choice is yours." Pride and ancient hatred had warred in Darius Blood Moon's scarred face. "There can be no peace while a veil sits on the throne that once belonged to my ancestors." "Perhaps not," Ronan had acknowledged, "but there can be justice. Territory of your own, representation in the Council of Pacts, recognition of your lineage, if you abandon raids on innocent villages and the use of poison on your own people." It had not been an easy negotiation, nor a quick one. Blood called to blood, as the raiders' message had proclaimed. But in the end, what had tipped the balance was not strength or cunning, or even justice, but the sight of Leora, an Omega with no pack and no position, standing firm beside an Alpha King and offering healing to the very warriors who had threatened her life. "Mercy is not weakness," Ronan had said in that final confrontation. "Sometimes it is the greatest strength of all." Now, 2 months later, an uneasy peace held between the Veil Pack and the newly recognized Blood Moon territories. Darius remained proud and difficult, but the raids had ceased. The remedy Leora had created had saved dozens of warriors from madness and death, and slowly, tentatively, trade had begun between lands that had known only enmity for centuries. "The Council wants me to formalize the Northern Treaty next month," Ronan said, breaking into her thoughts. "It means traveling to the Blood Moon Fortress again. In better circumstances this time, I hope," Leora remarked with a wry smile. "Indeed." He turned to face her fully, the celebration below momentarily forgotten. "I'd like you to accompany me. As your healing advisor?" Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability rarely seen beneath the composed mask of kingship. "As that, yes, and perhaps as something more." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. In the weeks since their return, their relationship had evolved beyond advisor and king, beyond the strange connection forged in her cottage on that winter night. Lingering glances, conversations that stretched into the early hours, a growing awareness of each other that neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. "Something more," Leora repeated softly. "That sounds rather open to interpretation, Your Majesty." A smile touched his lips. "Ronan," he corrected. "Here now, I'm just Ronan to you." "Never just anything," she countered, finding courage in the warmth of his gaze. "Alpha, King, the man who appeared at my door when I had nothing left but a piece of bread and the stubborn refusal to surrender. The man who found everything he didn't know he was seeking in a cottage at the edge of nowhere," he added, his voice dropping to a register that sent warmth spiraling through her. "The man who has waited, perhaps too patiently, to ask if the woman who saved him might consider a more permanent place at his side." Leora's breath caught as she understood what he was truly asking. "The court would never accept an Omega as—" "The court will accept what their king decrees," Ronan interrupted, though his tone remained gentle. "But more importantly, they will accept what they have already seen, that wisdom and strength come in many forms, and that the woman who helped bring peace to our territories has earned her place 100 times over." He reached for her hand, his touch warm despite the winter chill. "I'm not asking you to be my queen because of politics or alliances. I'm asking because the moment you opened your door to a stranger in a storm, something changed in me, something that has only grown stronger with each day since." Below them, the festival continued, the citizens of Wolf's Haven celebrating the peace their king had won. But here, in this quiet moment on the palace balcony, a different kind of peace was being offered, one personal and profound. "I once shared my last bread with you," Leora said softly. "Now you ask me to share my life." Yes, the single word held all the authority of an Alpha's command, yet was offered with the humility of a genuine question. Leora thought of her cottage at the edge of Thornridge, now repaired and expanded into a way station for travelers caught in mountain storms, of the journey that had brought her from isolation to the heart of a kingdom, of the bond that had formed between an Omega healer and an Alpha King, unexpected, unprecedented, yet stronger than either had anticipated. "Yes," she answered simply. her hand turning to clasp his. "Though I warn you, I may still prefer watching celebrations from balconies rather than leading them from thrones." Joy transformed Ronan's features, making him appear younger, lighter, as if a burden he had carried for years had finally been set down. "We'll build more balconies," he promised, drawing her closer. As their lips met beneath the winter moon, the same moon that had witnessed their first meeting months before, Leora Vane understood that some journeys never truly end. They simply transform, like seasons changing, like kingdoms healing, like hearts opening to possibilities once thought impossible. The path that had begun with a shared piece of bread had led her here, to love, to purpose, to a future neither of them could have imagined on that stormy night. And whatever challenges awaited them, whether from resistant council members or proud blood moon wolves, or the simple complexities of joining two lives, they would face them together. For what endures in the end is not power or position, or even peace. What endures is the courage to see worth in what others overlook, the wisdom to choose mercy when vengeance seems easier, and the simple, profound truth that sometimes the greatest gifts come from those who have nothing left to give but their last bread and the warmth of their heart. In the years to come, the story would be told throughout the territories, how an Alpha King disguised himself as a beggar to test the character of his subjects, and how an Omega with nothing to her name saved a kingdom with her compassion. Some versions emphasized the romance, others the politics, still others the healing knowledge that bridged ancient divides. But all agreed on one thing, that the reign of King Ronan and Queen Leora marked a new chapter in the history of the Eastern Territories, one where strength was measured not only in power, but in mercy, where the bond between Alpha and Omega transcended traditional hierarchies, and where a simple cottage at the edge of everything became a symbol of how a single act of kindness could change the fate of thousands. For as Queen Leora often reminded those who sought her wisdom in the years that followed, the true measure of wealth is not what you can afford to give, but what you cannot afford to withhold. Words first spoken over a shared piece of bread on a night when everything changed. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.